In this section, I want to take an introductory look at discourse analysis. And first of all, start by talking about what discourse analysis actually is. So far in this unit, we've been looking at grammar, phonology, lexis, and studying the individual bits of the language, the sounds, the words, the structures. Discourse analysis looks at what happens when language is actually used in communication and attempts to identify specific features of different types of language use and also specific structures. It sees language use as being rule governed, that there are rules for who says what, who says it when, and how they say it. And it attempts to identify those particular rules. It's a very, very big field. Discourse analysis has been a field of study for about 40 years now, and it's tended to split into various areas of interest which have gone off in their own directions. I'm not going to be distinguishing between these, although you'll often find them described as separate fields: pragmatics, conversational analysis, genre analysis, and so on. I'm going to be discussing them all under the generic term of discourse analysis. We will, however, be splitting them into two general areas, and that is the analysis of spoken English and the analysis of written English. We can argue that they're two distinct varieties of the language, and therefore we should expect them to follow slightly different rules. We're going to be looking at what the specific features of, for example, conversational English are. What do you find in conversational English that you don't find in written English, and of course vice versa. We're also going to be looking at the structure of conversation, the structure of written English. By structure, what I mean, I don't mean grammatical structure, I mean how the language actually proceeds. For example, in this section, we're going to be looking at the structure of teacher talk, and we're going to be seeing that you can define specific moves within teacher-student discourse, for example, which are very specific to that type of conversation. Later on, we're also going to be looking at intonation from a discourse point of view. However, for now, if in the books that you're reading you come across a specific chapter on intonation, by all means skip it, it's not relevant at the moment. Another thing that we're going to be looking at in this particular section is cohesion and coherence. By coherence, well, take this as an example. Somebody yells at you, somebody from the other side of your flat, your partner or flatmates or whoever, the phone's ringing, and you yell back, "I'm in the bath." There is no apparent connection between those two sentences, and yet we can interpret them as if there is. That's what we mean by coherence. In the conversation, those sentences are coherent. We understand the relationship of the second one to the first one. On the other hand, if you read, for example, in a newspaper article, 2 cars were involved in a serious crash on the M3 yesterday. The vehicles were travelling at approximately 180 miles per hour when the accident happened. You've immediately got links within the 2 sentences there between vehicles and cars and crash and accident. And cohesion looks at what the specific linking words are, the words which link ideas within sentences. We'll then in this section go on to a very brief introduction to genre analysis. The idea behind genre analysis is, well, for example, if you suddenly found a scrap of paper with some text on it, you could read that text, and you might, even from a very, very limited amount of text, be able to say, oh, this comes from a novel, or this is an advertisement, or this is from a travel brochure. Well, if that's true, it means that what is actually in that text linguistically, in terms of the actual features of the language, must give you clues, which means there must be differences. And in fact, the differences may not only be linguistic, they may be in the organisation of the text, they may be in the visual impact, the layout and so on. But there are going to be clues which suggest that this particular text is of one particular genre. Genre analysis looks at what those clues actually are. Why is this important for language teaching? Well, very often the sort of things that we've been talking about are culturally determined. The way things work in one language isn't necessarily true of another. And this means that our students are going to have to learn discourse features just in the same way as they may have to learn that although they have in their own language a structure which translates as have plus the past participle, it's not necessarily used in the same way as the present perfect in English. Take for example the word Mrs. In French that's Madame, in Italian it's Signora. But whereas to my Italian neighbour I might well say in the morning, I do say in the morning, Buongiorno Signora, I don't say the equivalent, Good morning Mrs. to my English neighbours. Another example might be compliments. What you make a compliment about differs vastly from one language to another, as do the responses which are appropriate to that compliment. We'll be looking at all of this in detail when we talk about teaching spoken language. However, there are also differences in written language which we're going to need to be looking at. Writing a research paper in Finnish doesn't necessarily entail using the same structure as in English. Writing a discursive essay in Japanese is the same, not the same as in English, and so on. We'll be seeing also examples of newspaper articles which in Italian and in English follow a completely different structure. So that's the field of discourse analysis as a whole. In this particular unit we're going to be looking at three things. We're going to be looking in detail at the structure of teacher talk, we're going to be looking at cohesion, and we're going to be looking at genre analysis.